Could I get, stepping back from this race, Steve, a sense of where you think America is going? They've called this a very consequential election. They've said a lot's at stake here. Do you think either candidate could move the needle enough to make things better?
There's one word that could cause the needle to work: respect. When you have respect and you look at the facts of any given situation, whether it's our policy in Syria or Iraq, or whether it's the budget and our massive deficit and its impact on people, I have to ask this question, Neil. Two intelligent people, regardless of their ideologies, if they sit down with respect for each other, how far apart could they be? Really, how far apart could you be if you respected the other side? On the other hand, if you're using rhetoric, to exaggerate, distort ideological differences, then really you're using language as a weapon to retain power, to get elected, to have control. You're not really using language as a way of communicating commonality. And I believe that most of the major issues that face society today sort of suggest their own course of action. And that certainly applies to the use of American military power or the kind of fiscal responsibility we should have in the way we handle our economy and government spending.
Well, who do you support then? I mean, if Steve Wynn votes tomorrow, if you haven't voted, who do you support?
I support the candidate for Senate in the state of Nevada, a doctor and a general, Joe Heck, who is an unqualified, superior candidate based upon my 49 years here in the state of Nevada. I'm a little confused about the presidential election, and as I mentioned to you before, I didn't support either candidate financially. I know both people, and I do like Hillary and Bill Clinton, and I've known and liked Donald Trump for over 30 years. My problem with the campaign is that I don't think the dialogue has brought out the best in either of them, and so it's been difficult for me to aggressively or enthusiastically support either person.
But the fact that you would support Heck, who is a Republican candidate, that would tip a Democratic seat for the outgoing Harry Reid for a Republican, would that apply to you? If you had to split the difference between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, you would go for Donald Trump? You prefer certainly his tax policies more than hers?
If you think you understand everybody's tax policy, then when we get through with this interview, you can call me up and explain it.
Well, the reason why I mentioned, as I said when we were in Vegas together, that he wants to cut taxes, maybe some people say too far. She wants to raise them, largely on upper-income folks. But does that strike to the core of their tax policies, that either you like or dislike one or the other?
I'll tell you what it strikes to. It strikes to the core of political rhetoric that does not explain the implications of either one. If you raise all the taxes, you're crimping small businesses that pay taxes as Chapter S corporations or partnerships. If you lower taxes without explaining how you're going to pay for it, you're going to accelerate the deficit. My point is, you've just highlighted the issue. Neither one of these conversations has given body to the problem and its solution. But when it comes to Joe Heck, our senatorial candidate, the congressman who's running for Senate, the three-term congressman, I'm a registered Democrat, but I have voted for Republicans. I've supported Democrats. I've certainly supported Republicans. And so I take the races one at a time, individual by individual, and try and figure out who would be best for the job. In the presidential race, it's been challenging. In the Senate race, I strongly favor Joe Heck for the reasons that if you just look at his record, it's the story.
But again, his story kind of mimics a lot of Donald Trump's. I'm trying to pin you down. Are you just going to leave the presidential part not filled out?
I'm going to flip a coin tomorrow and.
I see. Well, flip a coin.
No, you know, I guess my biggest concern, Neil, is this. if there is, Paul Ryan's going to be the Speaker of the House, no matter what. The Senate is jump ball. If Hillary is president, she will pick Supreme Court judges that are very, very liberal. Now, here's what happens, and this is the truth of it. When there's a sort of a legislative gridlock, then the executive branch, as you've seen for the past 7.5 years, resorts to taking dynamic action in the form of executive action, and all the agencies, IRS, EEOC, EPA, the NLRB, all those agencies, 465 agencies, 2,650,000 federal civilian employees, they all tend to expand their power. They issue regulations, several hundred a week for the past 8 years, thousands and thousands of new regulations.
True enough.
Okay, now what happens is, if you're the victim, if you're an institution or a business or an individual who thinks that a regulation has been misapplied unfairly, you resort to the courts. Now, the courts turn over, the federal courts, about 20% in every 4 years. I'm talking about district court judges, appellates, and occasionally the Supreme Court. So what really is at issue in this election is the nature and the objectivity and the fairness of the judiciary. Now, that may lead one to take one side or another, but I think what's really at stake here, I don't believe that Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton will behave significantly differently in questions in the Mideast at the moment. But I do think that with regard to Obamacare, the single most ridiculous piece of legislation, it's destroying the paychecks of my employees, and it was cunningly designed so that the big misery would come after this election. Now, we've begun to realize how bad the Affordable Care Act is. I know that Hillary Clinton thinks it needs to be fixed. She said it to me personally. I know that Donald Trump knows that it's no good. But this piece of junk, this Unaffordable Care Act, was passed with violating the Senate rules, really, and it needs to be fixed desperately, because America is going to rise up in real revolt when they figure it out.
I think you're voting for Donald Trump. That's what I've surmised. I've weighed all of this. It sounds like, yes, it sounds like you're voting for Trump. You're not going to tell me, but that's where I think you're leaning. We'll see. Steve Wynn, a real pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. You had a crazy schedule.